alone on Thanksgiving. And you know what? They asked me, they asked my wife, they asked her daughter, her children. We were all divided on whether Steve's parents came to Thanksgiving or not. It was weird, and it got into a big thing with that family. Finally, they figured out, I think I told you last week, they were invited, but they had another couple that was coming over. They're much older, they're in their 80s. And the other couple didn't show up, so they went to the country club and had lunch alone, and that's why the family thought they didn't have lunch Thanksgiving with anybody. So these issues that keep coming up over and over again, how about kids and the way you raise them? Oh man, that's huge. Especially if you're in a blended family. I've seen more families get into big trouble over that issue. And those unresolved issues will move you from what is harmony to what is hostility.
Yeah, true.
The worst unresolved issue is the ones you bring into your own marriage.
Wow.
You see, we all were brought up by parents, hopefully, teachers, and we learned some things that were good, and we learned some things that weren't so good. And what do we call that? We call the bad stuff baggage that we bring into the marriage. None of us come in with a clean slate. We all have habits, patterns, ways of doing things. We have hurts, we have hang-ups, we have wounds. And see, marriage, what we must understand, doesn't create this hostility. No, it only reveals what's going on with you, how much you brought into the marriage. And your spouse, see, they recognize this. It isn't long. I don't know why it took them to stand here and to go through the vows in order for them to realize what your bad habit is. But once they focus in on that bad habit, Brian, then they start this little program. And the program's called Let's Change You.
Yeah.
And they start working on a plan and a strategy how they're going to change their husband or their wife.
Your wife.
But all the time, the husband or the wife is saying, I'm not the one that needs changing. She's the one, he's the one. And you're thinking, that's how the sparks are going to start flying. You brought more flaws into your marriage than you realized. You got them from all the people that influenced you in your life. And some of you are still reacting to things out of your past. And where does it come from? The anger, the frustration. Maybe your parents were very controlling. Maybe you saw in the marriage of someone else how neglectful they were, how they don't affirm you. And what happens? You build up a resistance and a resentment and an anger towards it. So that any time your spouse remotely reminds you about the thing you hated so much in your parents or someone else, ooh, that's when stuff starts happening. You tend to take all that anger from the past, which you never got over. And see, that's one of the big things in counseling. When you come in, we try as best we can to get you to unload that baggage, to reveal, because there's a series of questions. I take you through this book, and there's a series of questions that you go through to reveal if you have hidden anger, if you have resentment towards your parents, or whatever. So we can work on that and pretty much put it aside, lay it to rest, so that when you get into the marriage, you've got a clean slate. The best way to prepare marriage is to get closure on your past. Now, you can write down one issue that's still unresolved in your marriage. Like Brian said, you might want to put your hand over it. But do you have those things? Any amens?
Amen.
Wow, that's pretty quiet.
Amen.
No amen. You have those issues that are still unresolved. Why? You need to grow up. You need to mature. You need to take responsibility. Okay, here go.
All right. The worst sin in marriage, if I were to ask you what that is, I'm sure a lot of you would be thinking about that horrible one. But it's actually unforgiveness. And when we hold on to unforgiveness, that's number 4, is unforgiven mistakes. When we hold on to that, that's what holds all other sins captive. And I've been there in my life, and I know that many of you where someone has done something to you, and maybe it was your spouse, and you feel like that is just so painful, and there's no way that you could ever forgive them. But I promise you, we have to get to a place where we realize that we are human, and we are going to either intentionally or unintentionally hurt each other. And so, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally, that hurt has been done. And what has to happen next is on your plate now. And unfortunately, I know there are some pretty heavy ones. There are some things that have happened to you guys where you feel like there's no way I could ever forgive that person. But believe me, we're going to talk about this later, about how there's this freedom that you will feel if you let go of that unforgiveness, that whatever it was that was hurt, that was done to you, if you let go of that, man, that's the best feeling that you could ever feel. We have this scale, what I've done wrong and what you've done wrong. When we get into arguments, isn't it amazing how that scale always tips towards your favor on how, I know I've hurt my spouse, but my spouse has hurt me so much more. And we have to stop looking at it that way. And we have to look at it, well, my wife, my husband, someone, my friend, my family, they've hurt me. And yeah, I've probably done a lot of stuff too. But I need to get to a place where I can forgive them. Because there are mistakes, there are issues, there are hurts that are going to happen to us. And what are we going to do with those? It's on us. So I beg you, because it's so destructive, that you get to a place where you forgive that person. So it could be your spouse, it could be a family, friends, whoever. Write down maybe, if you have one, of one hurt that you have such a hard time letting go of. And I know as we get through this four, some of you are saying, well, you described my whole marriage to me. Thank you, Pastor, for sharing that. I feel great. In Romans chapter 4, verse 17, it says, God raises the dead to life and creates new things. And I think this is so true of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the ABCs, D's, E's, and F's of this marriage makeover. And this is what we truly believe, that God can create a new marriage. So, what's A?
A, accept responsibility for my past. Don't overlook it. Dig into it. See what it is and admit that we've got some issues that we need to deal with. Galatians 6:5, each person must be responsible for himself. You know what? I think one of the greatest lessons you can learn is this lesson. You in no way can control what your wife says or what your husband says, the other person. You can't control them. But what you can control is how you respond to them. And I found that to be so true. Dorcas and I have put that into practice. Yeah, we have our moments, but we can't control what the other person has said or done, but we can control our response. If you start on you, not on them, and accept responsibility for your past, things will begin to change. The biggest barrier to accepting responsibility is the myth of incompatibility. What is that? How many of you have heard of incompatibility?
Heard of it.
If you're, I don't want to say anything against any particular occupation, but we've heard people say, well, we're just incompatible. Dr. Paul Tournier wrote, so-called incompatibility is a myth invented by judges in order to make a plea for divorce. I can remember the day we never heard of this incompatibility as a reason for divorce. And I can remember when it changed. Not the exact date, but I can remember when it changed, and everybody was going to the divorce court claiming incompatibility, and the judges say, okay, you got your divorce. It's like an excuse that people use for their failings. Misunderstandings and mistakes can be corrected in any marriage if you're willing to do so. It's a choice. And what this doctor is saying is there's no such thing as incompatibility. What he calls it is immaturity. You refuse to grow. I want what I want. You're stubborn. You're selfish. Now, any two people can be compatible if they try. And so I encourage you to recognize the fact that you have the opportunity to change. God's given you choice. And you can change. I'll tell you the biggest obstacle is that you think if you humble yourself, admit where you're wrong, that your spouse is going to take an advantage of that. But if you have God in your marriage, God will work it out for you, and it'll be a wonderful blending and a humbling that both parties come together. What's B?
B is believe God can change my marriage. And I don't know where you're at in your marriage right now. Some of you may feel hopeless. Some may feel optimistic, scared, excited. There could be a whole range of emotions. When I think about my marriage, it's easy to look back and go, oh, I see the roller coaster. There are days and times and periods in our lives where we are just way up here. And then there's times when you're way at the bottom. And when you're at the bottom, doesn't it feel hopeless? Doesn't it feel like I could never get back to where I was? I could never get back to that amazing time that we had together. And I think that we have to understand, get to a place where we realize that God can do what we can't. And there's this great Bible verse in Matthew chapter 19, verse 26. It says, humanly speaking, it is impossible. But with God, everything is possible. And to back that up, before Matthew chapter 17, Jesus talks about having faith as small as a mustard seed. Man, we can move mountains. And this kind of trust is what we need to have in our lives, and realizing that you're right. Maybe you can't do a whole lot. Maybe you're at a place where it just feels you're at the bottom. And we have to realize that God, and acknowledge that, know that God is the one who can make a huge change in your marriage. When I say God hasn't given up on your marriage, I know that there's some of you feel different emotions, and some of you may have already closed the door and you're done. Some of you may be thinking, well, no, we can't, or maybe you can't. But God can resurrect the most hopeless, the most dead, the most destructive marriage that we have ever seen. This is the God who created the universe.